Our first guest is, if I can put it this way, a veteran of GREG, in the sense that his previous appearances when he was with Auckland Council, Grant Barnes, now Chief Executive, the Chief Regulatory Officer over the ditch, New South Wales, of the NRAR, which stands for the National Resources Access Regulator. Bookended the previous seasons of conferences, and that's why it's fitting in so many ways that he joins us today, but also absolutely fascinating statutory mandate, which Grant will tell him about when he's dealing with the question of how do you build trust. A regulator 4.5 years young, dealing, I think, with the territory the size of Germany and France, locked together with masses of water, very topical, water everywhere, but not a lot of it necessarily to drink, but a lot of it to be regulated. How do we deal with that situation? Grant will join us now to take you through that. There'll be a Q&A opportunity afterwards. I would just ask, before I hand to Grant, on an administrative note, if the first panel could make themselves available at the mic desk to be mic'd up, you know who you are. And now, a big hand, please. Members of the audience, Grant Barnes.
Ina mana, ina reo, e ro rangatira mauna hohi whā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Grant Barnes takawingawa. E mahi anō hei kai whakahaere mātua mō tū Chief Regulatory Officer of the Natural Resources Access Regulator. I heard Ian describe us as the National Access Regulator, not quite the Natural Access Regulator for New South Wales. Thank you to Ian for the invitation. I always love coming back to Wellington, and if you survive the flight, as I did, you're presented as you hop into the taxi with that important question: the tunnel or the bay? And I took the bay, as you should do, because it's such a beautiful drive. But the reason why I'm telling you this story is because I remember last time I was in this auditorium some years ago, I was due to announce or support the Associate Minister of Local Government at the time on a big announcement. And as we got closer to Oriental Parade, I then realised why some people choose the tunnel over the bay. And there was a gridlock of cars. And I could see Te Papa, and I knew that I was not going to get there if I sat in this car much longer. So in my suit and tie, looking my best, I got out of the car and I ran. And I ran for 20 minutes as fast as my little heart and little legs could carry me, to the point where, almost close to exhaustion, I burst into those doors, made it up to the stage and said, "Welcome to the stage." I'm glad it's not the case this time around, and there's no longer the big run to the stage. But I am very pleased to join you, and it's lovely sitting in the audience and hearing Te Reo being spoken and the beautiful words of pity. I'm here today on my third occasion. The first one was some years ago, and I can't remember when it was. It was the inaugural conference, and I joined Stephen May from local government, and we talked about how the challenges of regulating from a local government perspective. Pre-COVID, in 2019, I had the honour of talking about the Natural Resources Access Regulator in its very early days of its setup. Now, fast forward today, in a global pandemic behind us, hopefully, I'm wiser, I'm certainly warier for the experience. So I want to talk to you today about public trust and three elements. Its importance to the regulator's authorised environment, how we measure trust and how we tailor our interventions accordingly, and what's worked or working for us and the lessons that we've learnt over the past 4.5 years. But I thought I'd start just with a bit of context and give you some idea about the work of the Natural Resources Access Regulator. I should say that we are exclusively about water, but we call the Natural Resources Access Regulator because the acronym NRA sounds less offensive than the acronym WAR. It's not the one that really works well if you're trying to re-engage and rebuild public trust and confidence in water. So 5 years ago, the New South Wales commissioned a review of water regulation following a program by the ABC called Four Corners. It's like the 60 Minutes equivalent. It was quite the expose by the journalist that uncovered or allegations of widespread water theft in the Murray-Darling Basin of New South Wales by some very prominent irrigators, and the footage was compelling. The show also made some allegations about senior leadership within the bureaucracy and attributed some of the conduct to maladministration. The minister at the time was very courageous. It was equivalent in New Zealand political terms to Winston Peters calling an inquiry on racing. This was a rural-led politician who called for a far-reaching inquiry into how water was managed, and in doing so brought the spotlight on irrigators, a major funder of the Nationals' political campaign. So he's a very courageous minister at the time, commissioned an independent bureaucrat who delivered 2 reports on water management in New South Wales. Ken Matthews delivered his reports within 8 weeks of the program airing. And I liken it, when I think of the speed in which the New South Wales government responded to the water quality incident that occurred in the Hawke's Bay some years ago. So a very quick, rapid response from the New South Wales government. Ken's findings aligned with 4 previous reports done by the New South Wales Ombudsman. His report also aligned with another inquiry that the Commonwealth Government of Australia ran. And in New South Wales, they have a body called the Independent Commission Against Corruption. And they too undertook an inquiry and found evidence of maladministration. So there was a big body of work done that brought a spotlight onto how water was regulated in New South Wales. And from that was a political will to do something about it. And now, within the space of 4 months, my organisation was created with its own statute, and an independent board of governors was appointed. And I moved over from Auckland back in April of 2018. So about 7 months after the program aired. So we are established by statute to ensure the efficient, effective, accountable and transparent regulation of water in New South Wales. And importantly for today, we have in our statute the objective to maintain public confidence in water regulation. Now, I'd invite in the questions someone from the audience to tell me whether there is another regulator that has public confidence, a requirement to maintain it in their statute, because I haven't found it yet. So as the independent regulator, we have re-established a visible compliance presence with boots on the ground in New South Wales. We have reset what it means to be a professional regulator, one that's outcome focused, intelligence led and risk based. We require the highest ethical standards of our people in terms of their conduct, and we often publicly commit to acting entirely in the public's interest and not narrowly in the interests of the regulated community, as was the previous allegations. And finally, with the board's support and my leadership, we commit to acting, commit to fiercely protecting our independence. So our work is undertaken across New South Wales, so it's over 800,000 square kilometres of land. There's a lot of licensees that we administer and lots of licensed works, levees, flood works, storages and so forth. It's a pretty small organisation with 200 staff. The challenging aspect of it's distributed across 21 offices throughout New South Wales, so I spend a lot of time on the road visiting some pretty special places. So here is New South Wales, and through our time over the past 4.5 years, we've observed pleasingly a positive shifting in the rates of compliance, largely based on reconnecting with water users, shaking hands, kissing babies, in that order, to rebuild a presence and it's a way of re-establishing a relationship with irrigators and with farmers and so forth. So I'll put it spatially into context. I couldn't find the overlay of New South Wales. You see Australia, and the red is what I sketched last night as New South Wales. I couldn't find the Germany-France comparison, but I've overlaid it to the left there with the USA. The point is, it's a big piece of territory to cover, to regulate. So we monitor, audit, and regulate the use of water across these many, many legal instruments, tens of thousands of water users and landholders, and with that comes hundreds and hundreds of thousands of specific conditions that manage the rights and obligations. So to try and make our work seem simpler, we are essentially controlling the timing of water take. When you can take it, there are protections with respect to environmental water. There are times when pumps cannot be operated because of the cease to pump rules that are associated with flow rates. There's the enforcement of no take orders. And there's also ensuring that when water is taken, the meter is recorded accurately. We're involved in enforcing or oversighting the volume of water taken. And this is very, very carefully allocated. So one thing that New South Wales does particularly well is has a really deep understanding of water availability in a really scarce environment. It's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights. I think the four horsemen are just around the corner following the pestilence that we recently suffered. But as a result of that understanding of water and its scarcity, every drop is allocated, whether it's to the environment, for cultural use, for community use, or for productive irrigation use. And we have a role to make sure that those drops of water get to where they're supposed to be and nowhere else. And we also control, through the conditions of approval, the location where water can be taken from. So we've been pretty busy. So in 4.5 years of operation, we've undertaken over 4,500 investigations, concluded most of those resulting in compliance actions, 1,300 to date. Much like you, as fellow regulators, we follow a graduated enforcement approach. So there's the issuance of notices, cautions, stop works, show clauses, penalty infringement notices, and right the way up the triangle to enforcement action, to taking prosecutions. And right at the top, we've taken 38 prosecutions so far. That's in 4.5 years. That compares to 6 in the 20 years before we were formed. So it was a pretty liberal environment in which the compliance enforcement worked in New South Wales prior to our arrival. Now we know, as a result of the work and having these boots on the ground, staff out there re-engaging with water users, that most of them are committed to doing the right thing. In fact, we know that empirically, because of the program that we run, that just over 70% of water users throughout the Murray-Darling Basin, so equivalent to Germany and France, are complying with their obligations. Now, about 20% beyond that are making mistakes, but they're of a minor consequence, and they don't mean to. It's one of this word always sounds awful when I say this. It's one of ignorance or a misunderstanding of those obligations. New South Wales government is not alone, I don't believe, in writing conditions that are uninterpretable in terms of plain English. My staff struggle, I certainly do, and water users equally, which means they can find themselves in a bit of trouble where they were supposed to do something but have misinterpreted and done something else. And that's something that we can quickly correct through the provision of guidance. Now, the top of the triangle is about 4% of water users who are willful actors in their conduct and are breaking the law for profit. And when I say profit, there is a heck of a lot of money to be made in growing fibre in New South Wales. At the moment, particularly in cotton, you can do pretty well out of a 10,000 hectare paddock of cotton. All right, so let me get to the the main thrust of the talk today. So the public trust and how it is that you rebuild it when it comes from such a low base. So our efforts to restore public trust are focused on three themes. The firstly is highlighting our capacity to detect non-compliance. I don't know about you, but before Lola, my Labrador, passed away and I would take her to the park, I'd always take the plastic bag, right? Because inevitably something's going to happen out of the back end. I didn't do that. I did that because there in Auckland, there's a risk of detection, one, but also as a good citizen, I'm aware of the social norms that come with picking up after your dog. That's what we're trying to do here in highlighting to the regulated community that we've got the capacity to detect non-compliance. Whilst the territory might be the size of Germany and France, we have technology, surveillance technology that's highly accurate and sophisticated and enables us to see what's going on in the landscape in almost a real time. So the likelihood of us catching miscreants is quite high. Second theme is establishing clear consequences for those rule breakers. In the past, there wasn't. If you strayed, just took a little step across the line, nothing really was going to happen. And as a consequence, people took further steps well out of the line until their conduct was quite egregious. And finally, and the third theme is making it easier to comply. And that's really targeting that 20% of water users who are trying to do their best, but they're making mistakes. And that's because the legislation, the regulatory instruments, and everything associated with it is so complicated. So the heavy promotion on our capacity to detect non-compliance, we do a lot of work in the media, prompting stories around our detection. It has a basis of truth, of course, but there is an element of promoting that we do when we talk about, there's that satellite going across you right now, or there's those boffins in the back office doing the analysis. We create this strong, abiding impression that we have the means to watch, to detect the movement of water, and we do that through active promotion in the media. And the media love tech stories. They like it when we talk about satellites and lasers and all sorts. Alongside that promotion is talking about the consequence of the rule breaking, both for specific deterrence purposes, but more importantly for us is the general deterrence. So we push those messages really hard. I should say that part of the independence of my role comes with the ability to own our own voice. We can speak to the media without going through the normal bureaucratic channels that many of you would be subject to. The minister does not endorse what I say. The minister doesn't read my media releases. The minister doesn't control our YouTube channel, our Twitter channel. What else is there? It's Facebook. Joking about Instagram and what's that other one that the kids are on? I can't remember. But there's all sorts of opportunities in media to promote what we're doing, and we don't have to get the sign-off of the minister to do it, which means we can be in the media within a matter of hours if it's necessary, sometimes in minutes, not the days it takes for my colleagues in the New South Wales bureaucracy. So we push it really hard, and we also maintain, as part of our transparency commitment, a public register on the website that details the location of every enforcement action undertaken, and with respect to prosecutions, we name those individuals and companies. All right. Thirdly, that third theme in the spirit of rebuilding trust is the deliberate provision of education and advice for those who seek it willingly and respond appropriately. So we've got a lot of resources that we've developed. We've invested heavily in the education side of the organisation. A lot of material produced in digital form and in hard copy form, and an active outreach program where we have people out in the bush building those relationships, with a real emphasis on building the knowledge around the rules. So one of the things about trust, if as I've described to you that we have this objective, the statutory objective to maintain public trust, you've got to start with a baseline of what is trust amongst the regulated community, amongst stakeholders, and amongst the public. So we do that through a biennial survey that's complemented by pulse surveys. I have social researchers on my team who maintain that program of engagement, of social research engagement with the community in order to firstly baseline and then to track change over time. So here's one of the results that we've got. It's the importance of enforcing New South Wales water laws, and there's a lot of green, and the green is good. Across those three cohorts, stakeholders think it's important to enforce laws. It's good. The regulated entity does too, and so too does the general public. That was the baseline in which we've established, and it gives us some credibility when we say that we have a job to enforce the law, and we're doing so in the public's interest, and here's the evidence that supports that. Another graph that's related to this survey is the question, or is it okay to break the rules under certain circumstances? Now, the regulated entity, lots of blue, which is good. That means what they're saying is that it's not okay to break the law even under certain circumstances. There is a little green there on the left-hand side, and that's because this survey was done just as the drought was breaking in New South Wales, and it was incredibly dire. I remember being on farm, meeting a landholder. He had a huge parcel of land. He was a grazier of cattle and Dorpus sheep. He only had a handful of stock left. The homestead had run out of potable water, and he was moving his portable pump across to this fetid green pond that you wouldn't let the ducks swim in, let alone drink it. They are desperate times that many landholders were facing, and in those sort of consequences, you can see why the decision to turn the pump on was in their own personal interests. And with a regulator and ensuring that we are fair and proportionate in our response, that's a sort of example where we've exercised our discretion and offered assistance by way of bringing in potable water to his farm. So what these surveys have done, and the key findings that have arisen for us, is acknowledging the importance for New South Wales water laws to be enforced, and that there's little acceptance for them to be broken. Throw the book at them is often the public refrain that we get in the comments on Facebook when we promote some non-compliance. There's a sense that water laws are complicated and that compliance enforcement has been mismanaged in the past. That perception is borne out by those inquiries I talked to you about. There's moderate confidence in enforcement at present. It's funny, if you're in the south of the state, you think the ones up the north are a bunch of thieving bees. If you're up the north of the state, you think it's those bees down there that's taken on the water. So they're all blaming everyone else. No one really looking at their own practices. So that generates a degree of skepticism about the degree of enforcement, and our response is to keep promoting what we're doing. There's limited awareness of the Natural Resources Access Regulator, and it's not really a title that rolls off the tongue, is it? And just looking across the audience and appreciating you're all representing different regulators, it's a crowded marketplace. And for most people in New South Wales, they just see me wearing this, the New South Wales government, not the flavour particular. So that makes it challenging for us, if we're to show that we're maintaining public trust, to be able to attribute that back to our actions and not the general actions of the New South Wales government. And there's low levels of agreement that we are communicating sufficiently. And that's just a reminder to us to keep pushing out the messages, keep diversifying the channels by which we are connecting, using all means that we can to do it. So how have we responded? Increasing community engagement. That's a big investment in boots, with people with the interpersonal skills to build relationships. Investing in education, enhancing our communication. So when this findings came out, we didn't have the social media channels. We hadn't quite got the cadence of regular media releases and so forth. Building our presence in regional New South Wales and continue to build the capability of both our people and the technology is where we're going, where we are progressing through. So the strategic elements of what we're doing is here described threefold. So in order to maintain that public trust, you've got to understand the community that we regulate and the different personas, whether you are the corporate irrigator to the mum and dad, family farmer, or to the different stakeholders that are represented in New South Wales, or to the general public. Now, if you're familiar with New South Wales, most of us live on the coast. It's a beautiful place to be, great beaches. On the other side of the dividing range, it becomes a bit more challenging, much browner, and much more sparse. So quite a different cohort from the city dwellers like myself and those who live in the bush or in country. The second part of our engagement strategy is fostering the understanding of the rules and the way we regulate. So we talk often about those discretionary factors and how we make decisions, how we weigh up risk and harm, how we assess culpability, the public's interest, attitude to compliance. I think terminology that you'll all be familiar with as regulatory practitioners. And thirdly, and we've been saying this more often recent times, the raising compliance, that level of compliance, is something that's a shared responsibility. You simply can't do it by virtue of strict enforcement. It involves community participation, and it certainly involves the market stepping in and self-regulating. Now, for cotton, everything goes from the farm to a gin, a cotton gin. So that's a point where if the market was willing to self-regulate, they could exert some considerable control. They don't, but that's a subject for another talk, I think. Okay, so what's working? Big thing for us is being clear about what our tone of voice is, getting those messages agreed amongst the exec and with the board, and then using them consistently. So stakeholders hear me saying the same thing as my executive is saying things, as well as our frontline staff are saying the same thing. So we're a proactive regulator, and we have a role of making it easier to follow the rules where there is a willingness to follow that advice and guidance. We focus on the benefit of compliance, so seeing regulation as a benefit, not simply as a cost. And in New South Wales, and maybe New Zealand will head this way ultimately, but there's a price on water, and water is traded. Now, if you're going to buy water in the marketplace, you expect it to turn up at your farm gate, and it literally does. You put an order in, and right the way back up the headwaters at a catchment, a dam will open, and a volume of water will be shot down from that dam, and it'll turn up at your farm gate 3 or 4 days later, and you'll suck out the volume that you've ordered. You're only going to pay, I don't know, $1,000 a megalitre for that water if it's guaranteed it's going to turn up and it's not going to be siphoned or leaked by some other ways. So we talk about the value that we bring to underpinning the price of water. It's $29 billion is the asset, Australian dollars. $29 billion is the asset, the value of water in New South Wales, and it underpins about $4 billion worth of economic activity. My agency costs about $30 million to run, so I reckon that's a good return on the government's investment. That's what I tell Treasury, at least. We don't shy away from enforcing the law. I was early days in this role, and I'd come from Auckland Council where you educate first, and then you educate a bit more, and then you do some education, and then once you've educated and they still haven't done what they're supposed to do, you might consider enforcing the law, but you probably won't because the politicians won't let you. So that was how I operated. You do everything you possibly can to get them to comply. We don't do that here. And I remember one of my executives stood up in a public meeting in response to a question about what will NRA do, and the response he said was, "We will enforce the law." That was like a shot to my heart. Really? oh, okay, this is serious. And we have done now, and I described before how many prosecutions we've taken. So we will use education, encouragement where we can, but enforce where you make us. And that's really evaluating the risk and the harm and the attitude to compliance, that culpability are the two major factors in that instance. And our work is a shared responsibility. I mentioned that before. This tone of voice has been developed through our social researchers using this, some focus groups. And we know that it resonates with stakeholders, with the regulated community, and with the public. So here's a couple of examples. We run frequent campaigns. We have an in-house videoing team, something like that. And we have so one of the campaigns example on our website is the Know the Rules campaign. So staff are actors. They film going about their day-to-day roles, and they talk about the importance. We ran one more recently about water. What are you really taking? And that's an appreciation of the importance of water in rural communities. And if you're taking water you're not entitled to, you're taking it from your neighbour, you're taking it from the community, you're taking it from the environment and from cultural values. And in Australia, I think similar to New Zealand, there's a real thing about doing what's right for your mates. And the real social norm there. So the people who don't and are almost ostracised. So we make it really be clear in that campaign. And we ran a campaign more recently about women and water. You can do it with a little bit of budget, an iPhone 13, 14, whatever it is, and go and do some filming and put it up on YouTube. It's pretty simple to edit. I don't do it because I'm not smart enough, but a couple of young folk do, and it's quite extraordinary. So we're really clear about the channels that we operate. There are indirect channels that we use, media in particular, radio, and the importance to be responsive to journalists when they've got questions, getting up on their show, meeting their deadlines and so forth. We do some back-end stuff in Google with search term optimization, search engine ads and stuff like that to promote our work, come to conferences and talk about our work as well. And as well as we've put a bit of money aside to run advertising campaigns in both print and radio. These direct channels, this is traditionally what you'd experience with sending letters, going to field days and so forth. And then a lot of work now in the third party, trying to build that, trying to encourage others to tell our story. So here's a more recent example. This is the New South Wales' equivalent of country calendar. The place stops on Sunday when ABC Landline runs. Well, at least everyone in the country stops for an hour to watch ABC Landline. And so we pitched a story to them a couple of months ago that we thought they might be interested in. And sure enough, the journalist rocked up with her production crew and they did a great story on how we utilize technology. And if you want to learn more about that, you can join Ian and I tomorrow on a webinar where I'll talk more specifically about that intelligence, the surveillance, the drones, the satellites and so forth. A lot of negative perceptions still abound within the community. One is that we don't have enough staff to actively monitor all water use. And that's just simply a consequence, again, against the size of the territory that we're looking after. It's why we've invested so heavily in Eyes in the Sky, and why we talk a lot about what we can see using these satellites. And let me put it simply. You can detect through publicly available satellites the water being stored in the reservoirs, the water's being released down the rivers and creeks, the water being extracted from the works, stored in a thing called turkey nest dams. And they're so big, if you're that inclined, jump on Google Earth and you can see the size of these storages out in the country. They're just massive things. So you've got to store water. The satellites can show the change in storage volume of these dams as the water is then applied to crop. And then we use another satellite which detects changes in crop resonance, its optical properties, and we equate that to crop growth. And finally, that all gets attributed back to the water accounting system. And if the two things are out of balance, then it flags to us, and we just make a friendly phone call to, hey, what's going on? We're too slow to respond to reported illegal activity. Part of that is just simply the sheer complexity of running our investigations. So we'll receive a suspicious activity report, we'll log it, we'll let the public, we'll thank the public for making their report within 3 days of receipt. And then there's a big black box where something happens, and the public, because we're not ringing up every week and saying, well, we've spoken to Bob and we've done a record of interview, right now we're going to do some other things over there. We don't run that commentary. There's a perception that we're not doing much. And that's one that's hard to counter, because we don't want to be in the position to be giving a running log back to the informant about what's going on. It wouldn't be appropriate. The third one is not so much in our control. The penalties are too low and the punishment's too soft. 10,000 hectares of cotton in the current market will gross about 100 million Australian dollars. So if you're looking to change career, I recommend you get into fibre. Probably too late, because most of it's already owned by about 3 or 4 people in New South Wales. But nevertheless, there's a lot of money to be made if you're that inclined. What it does mean is that there's a real incentive. If you don't care about those social norms and being ostracised, you can make a lot of money by breaking the law and being prepared to pay the $250,000 that the court might impose once we get a conviction. We have to do something different. In the toolbox, look at other ways that we can apply a more appropriate sanction. Proceeds of crime is one of the things we're looking into. And it may be just a case, I've been talking to federal colleagues about having to secure some warehouses big enough to hold some cotton harvesters that we would seize. And then there's a general perception that our staff lack understanding. And that's the final thing I'll just note, because in re-establishing a visible compliance presence and getting boots back on the ground, I thought it was really important that the community could see themselves reflected back. So we haven't gone for environmental science graduates in Sydney, because that just wouldn't work. You just don't pass the pub test. I struggle to pass the pub test in the way I talk, but it's important for us to have people who are community-minded, who come from the community as much as possible, subsequently trained in regulatory practice. So they have the right attitude and character, and then the technical skills follow. Initially, though, that gives the perspective to some as these guys don't know what they're talking about. That might have been true in the first few weeks. It's not now. They're pretty much experts. So I'll pause there. I think, Ian, we're good for time, aren't we, sir?
Who's got a question for Grant? Sir.
Kia ora, Grant. Fascinating presentation. Over here, sorry. I had a question about the social license for surveillance. You mentioned obviously satellites and drones. How do you control the perceptions and the use of that information?
It's a great question. By turning it into a virtue. So what the technology does mostly is validate the lawful and gives them, reference social license, so it goes back to their social license. They're able to say that there's this independent regulator through its boots on the ground operations and its eyes in the sky that are validating the fact that 70% of us are lawful actors. The other, that 20%, are minor non-compliance. We're able to demonstrate the response of the regulated community to get back into compliance. So we talk about the positive elements. When it comes to the negative perceptions of Big Brother, we talk about the privacy obligations, how the data is stored, and other constraints that go to the use. That first message is the one that gets the most resonance with the regulated community.
And I guess the other thing there, thank you, Grant, thank you for that question, because it actually turns on your special statutory mandate, doesn't it, Grant? I mean, I was looking at this last night when I was looking at anagram websites. I haven't seen anything like it in a statute. I think it's Section 10 of your Enabling Act basically says you're set up to actually promote trust and confidence, front and centre, 2 primary objectives. It's not sort of bolted on at the bottom where no one looks. And I think that's a very important point. How do you broker that? How do you deal with that? We've got some questions now. I've just been handed a second phone. Water access, use and quality is sometimes referred to as a canary in the mine, Grant, for the impacts of anthropogenic climate change and adaptation. Do you anticipate your resources of mandate increasing more than 30 million?
Oh my gosh. No, it's just certainly wearier over the last 4 years. Don't want any more responsibility. But what I will pick up on that question is what we've been able to do is take out theft from the public discourse. People don't talk about water being thieved, stolen anymore. They talk about the broader impacts of climate change on scarcity and the equity of how water is shared within New South Wales. That's the appropriate place for the debate to be focused on, not those acute and earlier issues around water theft. We've dealt with that part. Now there's other elements of the bureaucracy that needs to pick up the baton, if you like, and address those clear issues in New South Wales around climate change.
And I think it cues us nicely, actually, because we have got, of course, the climate change panel, and they're miking up at the back there in a moment. So it's a nice warm-up. Dita, we've got a question coming your way. Yes.
Hello, thank you, Grant. That was really good. Just a question, Grant, about the questionnaire that you use to assess trust, and would that questionnaire be available? Very interested in that.
Of course, and it's on the website, but I'm happy to see you afterwards about some other insights if you like to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Grant. I've got one question here, but keep them rolling, keep them rolling. We've got a few minutes left. Behavioural changes, Grant, is one of the questions. What have you seen from the increase in education and inspections? And I'd add as a bolt onto that, where does it sort of cross a line? Or is it a hard line, a soft line, or no line at all?
So at the moment, we're responding to some unrealised demand. So there's been a real need in New South Wales for someone to answer the phone and to offer that advice and guidance. And for a long time, that phone just rang off the hook. And that was a stance that we took about 18 months ago. I would say, it's not our job to tell you how to comply with the law. You need to do your own reconnaissance. That's up to you to work it out. I've come to the awareness that that's not really what our role should be for those who want to do the right thing but struggle to do so. So by investing in education, I've now got people who can answer the phone and who do have the knowledge to give that advice where previously they didn't.
I think just something that kind of pivots off that is a phrase you use, in effect, one government but a different flavour on each side of your shirt. How does that play out in the working across government context in your operating field, Grant?
We adopted this really simple model that at the time I thought made a lot of sense. There was the rule maker, so the policy colleagues doing all the hard work to come up with the rules and the regulations and so forth. There was the rule implementer, another agency that runs the rivers, that licenses the activity and so forth. And then there's us, right at the end, being the compliance and enforcement agency. And I thought that was wonderful. We've each got our lane and we'll just stick to that. The world's just not constructed in such easy terms. And it's not at all how it actually operates in practical terms.
Not a point lost on this audience. And actually, I'll pick up some fresh questions, keep them running. Thank you. Are there any, like NRAR, in other states? Or are you a rare bird?
So we're a rarity at the moment, much like the phoenix out of the fire. Oftentimes you see with regulation it snaps back, right? You've got quite a permissive regulatory regime, people take advantage of it, and boom, you snap right the way back. We're part of that snapback. Other parts of the other states and territories in New South Wales haven't really got there yet. And I encourage them to not follow New South Wales' example and let that Four Corners program take your knees out. I do think that as a model in the independence piece, it does have merit, and I could see it being expanded to other jurisdictions.
Last but not least, and this has got 16 votes and 16 thumbs up, and it segues into very much the middle part of our day. Do First Nation peoples have a role in looking after water, and what might this mean for your role in regulating without fear or favour? And also, again, what you say generally about relationships.
So they absolutely have a role. We have, as one of our enduring priorities, reflecting and respecting cultural values, Aboriginal spiritual values in the work that we do. And we've taken lessons from Mataranga Māori here and how you can attribute that similar ethos to understanding cultural values in Australia. There are many mobs many nations, much like there's many iwi, hapu and rohi in New Zealand, there's a heck of a long way that Australia needs to get to. They're well behind, may I say, where New Zealand is, and its relationship with its treaty partner, New South Wales, or the Commonwealth does not have that binding agreement, which makes it difficult in the water space, because very little water is actually, I'll emphasise again, water is owned in New South Wales. Very little of it is actually owned by the community, and hardly ever, just 2 or 3 drops would be owned by traditional owners. It is an inequitable system, and one I talk to my staff a lot about when it comes to fairness and equity, when you're dealing with something that privileges the powerful, privileges the rich over the dispossessed, and in many instances in New South Wales, they are local mobs, local nations.
Grant Barnes, that's a place to end it. A big thanks. Thank you very much indeed.